I managed to track down a patient whose husband died in Dihlabeng Hospital, and she believes it's the hospital that killed him. What happened to her was purely by chance that she went to the hospital. In December last year, on their way to Standerton, they came from KwaZulu-Natal to visit Maritsa's mother, and when they passed through Bethlehem, her husband developed serious pains and continuous pains in his stomach and in his chest. And she stopped at Dihlabeng. She looked at her GPS and said, "Where's the closest hospital?" She couldn't afford medical aid, and they ended up in Dihlabeng. I think the worst part for me of Maritsa's story is that her husband was eventually, after a few weeks, ended up in the intensive care unit. And when she went to visit her husband on some occasions, because there's no staff at the hospital and no one to carry down bodies if people die, she would have to visit her husband's bedside next to bodies that are lying on the beds that died earlier that day. She then called AFBOP, the undertaker's AFBOP, and decided to pay them to come and remove the bodies. But when they got to the hospital, they had 2 people to remove the body, but that was not enough because the hospital's lifts weren't working. The ICU unit is on the 4th floor of the hospital, so they had to get the body down to the ground floor where the hearse was waiting. In her words, her husband's body was rotten from the inside because he was lying there, he had pneumonia, and it wasn't the correct treatment. They carried him down. They had to beg 2 porters that didn't have a good attitude to want to help to carrying him down on a stretcher. And while they were doing that, there were bodily fluids pouring out of the body and blood pouring out of it on each and every single floor. And she saw people walking through it because it's the only way to get around at the hospital. None of the lifts were working. You had to use the stairs. And that's her last memory of the man that she loved, that she spent a life with. Initially, they diagnosed him with a stomach ulcer, which in the end, with a post-mortem report, didn't end up to be the cause of his death. He developed pneumonia that is resistant to ordinary forms of antibiotics. The hospital didn't have the resistant forms of antibiotics. The state sector does stock it. The hospital was just out of stock. And the doctors confirmed to me that for Maritsa's husband, they weren't the right treatment. They didn't have the correct antibiotics. At some stage, he got very, very weak and his protein levels got very low. And what doctors normally recommend when that happens is, because he couldn't eat orally, was to give someone intravenous feeding, but they didn't have the substance that you use for intravenous feeding, so they couldn't help him. And that's why Mariska feels that her husband died because there wasn't treatment, there wasn't doctors to help her. Maritsa is now planning to sue the hospital for medical negligence. Very recently, our National Health Minister, Aaron Motsoaledi, attended a conference where he complained about the sharp increase in medical negligence claims in public hospitals. And these Free State doctors said, they agree with it. Now, these doctors have tried to set up meetings and asked the provincial authorities at the health department if they could help, and they get no response. The Mail and Guardian, we did contact the Health Minister's office, and his spokesperson, Joe Mahela, said, yes, we did receive the letter, and we are concerned about the Free State. But the doctors say that does not translate into action because they haven't heard, no one acknowledged receipt to them. They no longer know where to turn to. They've explored all their options, and they felt the Health Minister is the one that must help now, but they didn't hear back from him. We also contacted the Provincial Health Department, Dr. Malakwani's office, and spoke to his spokesperson, Monli Mavambi. And Monli felt that it's not doctors' job to judge the MSc, to how his performance is. They should rather provide a service in the hospitals, and argued that these doctors possibly have a political motivation behind their complaints and going to the media. Actually, one of the doctors called us a day before we published the story and mentioned that there was a team from the Office of Health Standards that came to visit the hospital, as well as someone from the National Health Department. So in a way, there's already it seems like there's already been a little bit of movement. We of course really hope that the story would have an impact and that it would bring about positive change at the hospital. You know, our health minister is a man with exceptional vision, and he has this vision of a national health insurance scheme. And this hospital, the Dihlabeng Hospital, is in one of his NHI pilot sites that receives extra resources to build up its infrastructure. And the doctors at the hospital say they've never seen this money because the Dihlabeng seems to going backwards and not forward. In one doctor's words, they said the Free State health system is killing Motsoaledi's NHI dream.